in transition. And this is basically because what we are observing today, which we might think it gives us an opportunity or a clear indication of how things are going, might change in the next minute or month or whatever. And so to give us a sense of what is likely to happen or what may happen, we decide to capture it that way so we are not so changed. So that somebody then, I don't create the impression to you people as if what I'm discussing with you is finite, because it might change in minutes to come, in months to come, in years to come, and what have you. And so essentially, the point that we are making is that these changes that are going to be discussed are changes that may also change. As the saying goes, the only thing that is constant in this enterprise is change. Is that okay? The only constant change that we are all likely to see is that things might change. So this is going to be the outline. Essentially, there are three major things that I want to discuss with you following the discussion that we have had for the last two meetings. So the first one is for us to identify the main sources of this change that we are going to talk about. Where are these changes that have characterized the economic sector emanating from? Then we will single out on two main things. The first concept we will be singling out for analysis is the concept of bureaucracy. And I'm sure many of you have heard these things. People tell you the bureaucracy in the public sector is the bureaucracy. What exactly is the bureaucracy? And in that light. And then associated with this whole idea about bureaucracy is the concept of professionalism. And once again, I'm sure many of you have heard instances where somebody has described your action as being unprofessional. What exactly does professionalism entail? And who and what constitute or make somebody to be professional or otherwise? So essentially, these are the discussion I want to have with you. But before I do that, if there's a question or two based on our previous engagements, I will be glad, or I'll be willing to hear anybody who has a question or two. You can raise your hand and I will respond if you do have a question. If there are no questions, then I can proceed. Should I? All right. So the first objective, and maybe for the purpose of context, can we do a bit of a recall? What was the features, or what is the feature or the dominant features of the traditional economy? Quickly, as we discussed last semester. Can anybody help us? Yes, Sydney. Yes, Sydney. Just unmute yourself and.
Sorry, man, was out for the previous thing.
All right, go ahead.
For the question, you said if you had a question, I don't want to answer this question. Sorry.
What are you saying? I can't. Can you speak up? I didn't hear what you said.
No, I raised my hand earlier on. You asked if we have a question, we should raise our hand to ask, and then I raised mine, but it seems like it delayed a bit, so it's now showing.
Yeah. So if now that you have the opportunity, you can still go ahead and ask that question.
Okay, I wanted to know if this is the class to replace tomorrow morning's class, tomorrow the 7:30 class.
Why, Sydney, are you joining this class for the first time?
On the online one, yes, this is my first time in the online class.
But you know, we have 3 schedules. We have Tuesday evening, then we have Wednesday early morning, 7:30, and then there's another one on Thursday. All of us cannot meet.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure, don't worry.
All of us cannot be in one forum. And so the class is divided into 3, but the content is almost the same. And this is what is going to happen. But because the recordings are going to be made available to you, this content will not be repeated in a live recording session like this. When we meet on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, my colleague Dr. Hemin is going to engage you on family. And then I'm going to meet the Thursday group again.
Okay.
And I will discuss something else with them, but you will all have this content. So you are supposed to join one of these meetings at least once a week. Is that okay? All right, so let's continue.
Okay.
So as
Yes,
all
thank you very much.
That's okay, no problem. As we all know, the economy essentially focuses on 3 areas: the production, the distribution, and the consumption phases. So essentially, we are interested in what is produced, how it is produced, what informs what is produced, and other similar questions. The next phase is when it is produced, what happens? Who gets what, and why, and how? And after it has been distributed, what informs what is eaten? And this time around, when you talk about consumption, it is not just the physical, okay, chewing and swallowing of the edibles. No, it goes beyond that. Even what we wear, how we wear it, what we eat, and what is so, for example, within certain societies, we know what is called traditional dishes. What are these and what informs it? What is appropriate consumption? What is ethical consumption? I may not go into these technical discussions, but essentially that's what it means. What informs what we eat? Why is it that, for example, in this country, people find it so acceptable that, for example, cocoa, being in the white or the brown porridge, is to be eaten in the morning and not in the afternoon? Similar discussions or things of this nature is what we shall be discussing in this context. And I want you to have a very broad or an open mind. Ask the questions that may engage you, and I will do my best to answer these. So in this concept, as a result of social change, we are saying that the traditional economy, which was based on what people would describe as subsistence economy, people only producing to feed themselves, people, this whole gender-based production. So men has a particular way to do work to do, women has a particular work to do, and all that have changed. And some of them not in its entirety, some have changed. So one of the key sources of this change is what we call the monetization of the economy. Essentially, what are we saying? Monetization is a phase where unified means of exchange then has been adopted, right? So that wherever you go, there's a particular, so in Ghana, there are denomination or our currency, okay, is the cedi and the pesewa. Historically, other objects have been used as a means of exchange. Jeffrey, I've seen your hand up. I will give you an opportunity to ask your question. Again, we also talk about the fact that everything that is done is presented in a monetary value. So for example, in the production process in the traditional societies, we had the concept of inobwa or fidodo among the areas, where I would rather, I don't sell my labor, but I exchange my labor for yours. So 4, 5, 6 people be put together.
Monetization.
Jeffrey, if you are the one, you go ahead and ask a question since you have already interrupted my thought. Go.
Sorry, please. I wanted to ask if with the monetization of the economy, back then it was before the rural migration, we used the supply of the land, like the produces, to get money. But now, due to urbanization and modernization, we use money rather for we use the product rather. It's just a contribution I wanted to give.
All right, thank you very much, Jeffrey. All right, so the point essentially is that you see, when you talk about the monetization, it does not necessarily mean the paper money or the coin denomination. No, it is where things were valued by virtue of a common medium of exchange. We all understand that in the absence of money, then we're doing the barter trade, right? So you bring your goods and I say, okay, 3 pieces of cassava should be equivalent to 1 tuber of this, of that, or the, you know that, okay. It moved. So we talk about the instance where the cowries, for example, was used. In other places, later, I mean, salt, for example, was used, and other things of that nature were also used. Yeah, so that's essentially, but we all know the discussion. We know the value. We know the advantages that the monetization of the economy then brings, right? The next phase of this source of change is industrialization. Industrialization is simply the phase where industries were being set up. It needed human power. Beyond that, these industries were also adding value to primary commodities and what have you. These industries then created another interest in what became known as cash crops, because these industries needed these cash crops to facilitate their production processes. So if they have set up, for example, a cocoa processing company, they will need cocoa. If they want to make oil, they probably will need coconut or they will need a palm oil. The beverage industry also would thrive on cocoa or coffee and what have you. And then other relevant resources were also being created. So essentially, when it comes to the economy, you can talk about the monetization of the economy or the introduction of money economy. We can talk about the industrialization bit, and then we can talk about the introduction of cash crops. And some of these cash crops and other resources. So for example, beyond the cash crops, we also talk about the mining companies that also needed these resources, okay, natural resources for processing and what have you. So the gold, the diamond, the bauxite, and all those other economic resources were now to be mined for and what have you. So let's quickly look at the first one, if there are no questions. So the first one, I'm talking about, and these are things you know, I'm not teaching you now. It is just for you to recollect the strength, the argument for, and the impact for the monetization. So the general understanding is that it was more efficient in the sense that it gave people the opportunity to move things around right? It gives certainty. So people know that if it is 10 cities, it is 10 cities. If it is 50, it doesn't lie in the discretion of the service provider or the person selling the goods and what have you. Your resources could not be stored. I mean, so people talk about the fact that it gives you the store of value because it offers you an opportunity to know exactly how much your product is, even though it is debatable, especially when you come to countries where their currency keep depreciation. So that when you have 10,000 today, in a year or two's time, what 10,000 can afford today may not necessarily be the same. So the store of value bit is questionable, especially in less developed economies and in economies that have relatively weak and unstable currencies. Yeah, so that debate is there. But the other thing that also offers you is that it gives you a uniform means across the country. And even now, because of the convertibility of currencies, right? You may have a cedi, you may have a dollar, but you can go somewhere else and you know the value of the cedi. So you can move. I mean, you can travel to other countries with your cedi and they will change it for you. You can travel to other countries with your dollars and they will change for you in that currency and all that. So you get to move. I tell people, if you are struggling and you think your money is difficult to be converted, you leave it in your bank and you go with your ATM. And then you can access that country's currency at whatever level pace you want. What has been the impact? The impact generally in Ghana, for example, is that it has encouraged people to move about because they are all looking for the same thing. So migration has been flourishing because people can move. Again, it has also ensured that people can sell their labor, right? So for example, Ghana will every year fix the minimum wage. So it automatically gives you an idea of how much your labor is worth for 8 hours work and what have you. And if you don't have any resources, but you have energy, you know what we are going to do. And then you're going to do that. Beyond that, it's also facilitate inter-ethnic trade, regional trade, and essentially as people move, and I mean, interestingly, people understand money. Money is one of the greatest language of communication. Everybody knows what 10 cedis is, irrespective of the language you speak, right? And that is why Ghanaians who have never been to school can go to China and buy goods from China without speaking any language in Chinese and still come, right? So as this money comes, then it facilitates better interaction among people. And we all know the benefit of having successful interaction. The benefit includes the fact that it gives you an opportunity to understand each other. It gives you an opportunity to throw away certain misconceptions about certain ethnic groups, the myth, and all those other things, because you are interacting more and more frequently and irregularly. Once there's a business going on between you and the other person, you begin to value the relationship a bit more than if you didn't have that opportunity. The second idea that I want to introduce to you today has to do with this whole idea about industrialization. I have already talked to you about it, but essentially, we talk about industrialization as a transition from the use of human and animal power to the use of inanimate power-driven machines for the production of goods and services, right? And usually it is for commercial purposes. Industries are always for commercial purposes. It's just so somebody can make more money, make more profit, and produce for a large consumers, right? So the changes in the productive technology, implying a wider sense the technification, or better still, automation or mechanization of agricultural goods and even services. It means that in the ultimate sense, there's a transition from the man-made human resource, okay, to non-human power, usually driven machine for the production of goods and services. And I'm sure many of us have visited at least one industrial site or the other, or you have seen or you have watched how these things do happen across or in videos. I mean, if you haven't seen, yesterday I saw one of them the Dako farms. I mean, for those of us who are a little bit older, we knew that when in this country you talked about poultry, the first name that came up was Dako farms, formerly of Kumasi, or in the Ashanti region. And they provided enough eggs to feed huge part of the country. They gave us fresh chicken and poultry products. That industry company, which employed almost 1,000 plus people in the Kumasi area, collapsed. And I'm told in 2017, when the current government introduced this 1D, 1F, they applied. And because of the money that they were given under the project, it has been revived. And they were demonstrating, when the president had gone on a visit, and they were demonstrating how the company that was almost dead had come to life. And you could see live bird being hanged, and the machine then takes it, okay? The machine takes it to another level, okay? The machine takes it to another room, and you could see the live bird hanged like that, and it will be moving. And by the time it comes through another room, the live bird is dead. The feathers have been plucked. Then it moves another machine, and depending on what they want to do, either they take the entire intestines out, or especially if they want to prepare it as a food bed, and then it goes to another place, then they begin to cut. So those who want to get the wings, those who get the thighs, those who get the breast and all that, you see it being done. If you compare it to the traditional means of getting the chicken prepared, then you tend to understand why we talk about the fact that it's a transition from the use of human and animal power to the use of, so you see the machine cutting these live bird, the full bird into the required pieces and parts. And then it moves to another place where it is bagged. So you see the machine bagging it into different kilograms. And then it moves into the freezer for those that needs to be frozen. You see the same process with regard to the eggs, right? It's being packaged into the various crates. As the machine moves, it fills the crates, and then it's moved and all that. And the gentleman who was leading the discussion then talks about the fact that, I don't know what that gentleman means, but Esther, I can't see anything. I don't know what you mean. What is it that you want to see that you are not seeing? All right, so you then begin to see these things, right? And he talks about the fact that their production is like 100,000 birds a year. And he talks about the fact that KFC, and I'm sure majority of you have visited KFC before or have gone there either personally or gone with somebody else. And you see the number of chicken that is consumed on a daily basis, right? And you can imagine if you didn't have such a technology that could cut this chicken and somebody's job was to cut it into that pieces, I can imagine that would be his entire day's job, right? But what industrialization does is that technology then begins to take this over, and then they produce it on a mass scale. If you have any question, I will be willing to talk to you, or may walk you through that discussion as well. All right. So on this slide, what I do is to walk you through the development of the industrial age. And when you read the literature, it tells you that it took place in the 18th century, particularly in England, right? What did it do? We created an enormous employment opportunity because there was this huge technology that had been deployed. There's this huge skill that had been deployed, and in this elementary stage. And so they needed to force so much on human people. People then lost the sense of working for themselves in a subsistence era. and then began to do a bit more. They moved in. What did it do? It also increased the production of new goods and services, right? And then the development of markets across the world, because as they produce more and more, they just felt that they needed additional markets. And these also resulted in the urbanization. And when we do urbanization, rural urban migration, you probably will understand this whole discourse. And I'm sure you even understand them. It will just be a revision for us to have that discussion, right? Because the factories were tended to be sited in the big cities, and they needed human resources. And because people needed to make money, then they begin to move also from the smaller communities to the urban areas. So people, for example, also attribute urbanization to industrialization, right? Yes, the gentleman whose hand was up, can you please ask your question?
Thank you. So I wanted to ask, the second one, you said it created enormous employment opportunities. I wanted to ask how the use of machines and industrialization would rather not create unemployment, but rather create employment.
Okay, yeah, that's a very smart question, essentially, because one, what technology normally do is that it takes the place, okay, of human beings. And the general understanding is that what man can do, or what 10 men, for example, can do, one technology, when appropriately deployed, will be able to do that. Yes, but you see, in the era that these things were, so for example, that's even, so I talked about, I gave you the example of the video, the 5-10 minutes video that I watched about the farms yesterday, or the day before yesterday. The people who were living in the community, and now you have these companies that have been revitalized, and directly you have 250. So those 250 people automatically then will get a job to do. Especially in a country like Ghana, where people who work on their own still consider themselves as unemployed. You get it? There are so many people who are working, but because they are not on a salary scale, when you ask them, they say they're Juma. And by the time he will be talking to you, he's actually working. When you ask him, he said, me, I'm unemployed. Why? Because our concept of employment in this country is like when you are working for somebody and you are receiving a regular monthly income. That is one. But beyond that, apart from that, addressing that concept, what it also does is that they were not only producing to feed themselves, they were producing to create additional markets elsewhere. So go to, for example, a Kumfi. And a Kumfi is a pineapple juice company. It's still unable to meet its markets.
Yeah, pineapple.
There's so much demand for the product that they cannot meet their demand. And sometimes look at the indirect jobs that sometimes also leaves. So the entire enclave has become a pineapple growing enclave. So even those who are not working within the company, that is just employ about 300 or 400 people maximum, because you get the drivers who will be cutting these goods to Accra, to Kumasi, those who take it to the airport directly for it to be shipped outside, and those who go to the farms to bring the commodity, the ready product and all that. Those who are farming on the company's farm, as well as the outgrowers. These are all people who then begin to get a job, simply because the pineapple is not just being produced to be consumed locally, but it's also because they are running like 24 hours shift. They run like 2 or 3 shifts, especially those in the production line and all that. And so that is some of the things that we mean. Please, are you with me? All right, thank you very much. So now when you read the history of industrialization, you will come across some of these as the key features of the age of industrialization. So I talk about the rise of heavy industry. So the heavy industries were industries that came in based on very big technology at the time to add value to primary commodities. Another thing that also happened was that because majority of these companies were cutting very heavy things, they realized that it wasn't going to help their road. And so the railway industry then also emerged, right, to cut some of these things. And in Ghana, for example, we have always been complaining about the heavy loads that are being used to plow our road. And probably some people, it explains why some of our roads never last. If you look at this cargo, so I think 3 or 4 days ago, there was that heavy truck that got stuck under one of the footbridges. And the person was arrested because he had beaten against and all those things. And if you see some of the damages that some of these things have come, then we also talk about technology, because don't forget the definition of industrialization is the intensification, the transition from the human resource to the physical resource. And some of these things were the first thing that is being done and what have you. And then you have these group that we call the robber barons. These were the early capitalists who were so minded by the quest for money to the extent that they didn't care about anything. All that they did was to maximize their profit. And so people call them the robber baron, because they will do everything to ensure that they make more money, right? The Rockefellers and all those big, historically rich people were those that were classified as. So it's just like the big businessmen that you have in Ghana. Some of the stories that are, for example, being told about them. So I'm sure for those of you who have been following, you hear of Zoom Lion, right? In fact, the Zoom Lion is actually, for now, the biggest employer in this country. It employs almost like, I think almost about 500,000 people from its various business and entities. And people have tagged him and his company as being thieves, corrupt, and all those other things. And people think that they don't even care. So, for example, if you have followed the discussion and the writings of Manas Azuri, I mean, he makes the point that these guys appears to be shortchanging the Ghanaian. So, for example, he uses those who sweep the street and said that they are marked. I think the contract says that they are to be, each person is awarded about 600 or so. The company keeps about 400 in the name of facilitating their work. That is, they care for the uniform that they wear, the stickers that they are supposed to have, the tools that they use to clean, and other things in the name of the 400. And then only 200 goes to these employers. I mean, on the face of it, it looks like they are exploiting the very poor people, because how can somebody who is doing the actual work receive lesser amount than the person who just creates the opportunity for them? And so they were described as robber barons because they were robbing people, and on the basis of the robbery, they became very rich, right? In fact, at a point in time, some of them were more resourceful if you put their resources together than the whole America, right? And the general or some other people's understanding was that it's because they robbed the state to be that. And then because of these difficult environment that they operated and the exploitation that characterized their activities, the employees then began to come together. And then they formed what became known as trade unions or organized labor, right? And the whole idea, if you listen, I mean, just like the Akan proverb, okay? Like the broom, when you take one, you can easily break them. But if they are joined together, it becomes very difficult. So the whole idea is that there's strength in numbers. When we come together, you cannot fight such an exploitative group alone. But when you bind together, you become a force to be reckoned with. Is that okay? And so these are the 5 major features of the age of industrialization. You're talking about the rise of heavy industries, the railway industry emerging, which typically was using coal and heavy, dirty energy. The invention and technology then became the order of the day, the emergence of these capitalists, and then organized labor. So you could see them, an example of what. Then the robber barons I've already explained. So I say that the robber barons was a term applied to the businessmen in the 19th century who engage in, so the key word is unethical and monopolistic practices. Okay, and I say that they wielded widespread political influence and amassed enough resources, okay, and what have you. Some of the key known figures, and some of them, their companies are still very popular. I want to show it to you so you can see some of them. So for example, the first one here is Rockefeller. Then we have Vanderbilt, we have Andrew Carnegie, and then we have JP Morgan. And I'm sure majority of you still hear about JP Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie. Carnegie and the foundation that was set up in his name has been all around. In fact, University of Ghana have been a beneficiary of some of the funding. In fact, I personally speaking with you was a beneficiary of one of his scholarships. I got some money from his foundation to do my PhD and some of the research that I have done. But the whole idea was that the means by which they became rich were very terrible. And in fact, people say that as they realized that they weren't really enjoying a very good fame, they decided to pay back their money in some humanitarian services and what have you. And some of these foundations have been ongoing for some time now. Somebody raised his hand. Who was that? You can kindly get your question across if you haven't shared it already.
Yes, sir, please, I was the one.
Good, go ahead.
Please, mine is not a question. I couldn't see the picture of the rail. Is it railroading? Yeah, that one. I didn't see rail. That's right.
But at least later you saw it, or you still didn't see it. I mean,
yeah, they just wanted to see.
No, it's just a typical rail. I mean, these are the early types of rail. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
And in fact, some of them, they built the railway themselves.
Okay.
They built the railway themselves. Some of them, some very huge bridge, they used their money, invested in the bridge, right? Built the bridge.
Yes, please.
And then they later decided to tow it. So that if you want to use that bridge, you pay. You know.
Okay.
All right. So there have been two other hands. Jerry.
Okay. Sir, thank you.
Jeffrey, you're welcome. And then Graham. Yes, let me hear the two of you. So
Yes,
Graham first.
Please. I was wondering.
Sir, please, I want to ask about the robber barons. That, sir, please, did the government in any way have a hand in the way they were running their businesses and robbing from the people? And if not, then why were they also quiet about how they were doing their business?
Okay, so you see, and you know, one of the very interesting things is maybe you can ask yourself some of these questions. So who are some of the very notable businessmen in Ghana that you know, and their companies? Just mention some of them and let's have this discussion. Yes.
Say.
Yes.
Dr. Kwaku, despite.
Yes, Kwaku Otin, despite. Yeah, what again?
Kennedy Japan.
Who?
Kennedy Japan.
Kennedy Japan, okay. Maybe because he's a politician, maybe
one men's goal.
Good. Maybe because Kennedy Japan is a politician as well as a businessman, maybe you can take him out so that we can put the question that Graham asked in its proper context. What have you been saying about them? People say that they have some political engagement, right? So recently, Kwaku team was in the news because
Yes,
Captain Smart claims that because he had defaulted and all that, he was being warned that if he doesn't call him to order and all those other things, even though eventually it turned out to be that at least within the Ashanti region is one of the very large paying tax company or the whatever thing it is, I mean, right? But again, that perception is there. And people think that because they are somehow connected to the political actors, the governments of the day then begins to turn a blind eye. What didn't people say about Namwan, for example? That because he has some connection with the government, that is why he is not, but we all know that Namwan wasn't a politician, but we know that politicians will always look for money and they have allies as and when they want to go, right? We talk about Ibrahim Mahama because of his brother and his related activities and all those other things. You talk about Despite, people have that he's using his media outlet to push a particular political groupings and what have you. And so they may not be as hard on a particular regime as the other, you get that argument. So it is the same environment that they operated. And you see, when you are living in a community where the resources are not very much evenly distributed, people who are resourceful tends to sometimes have their way. They tend to have their way in so many ways because seemingly they are solving the problems. Please mute your microphone. Please mute your microphone. So they tend to kind of do things that may not necessarily be sanctioned but by the state. But sometimes when they go wrong, the state is somehow stifled in the ability to respond and all that. So yes, there was, and some of them were actually connected. And I remember telling you that in some instances, some of them, when you put their resources together, it was bigger than the state's entire resource. And so you dare not touch people because they can really undo your government, essentially. And so they become very powerful, sometimes even more powerful than the president at the time. Right. Yeah. All right. So any other question?
Thank you, sir.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, sir.
Yes. So
in addition to the
yes, go ahead.
In addition to the explanation you just gave, I want to know, I have a discussion group, and when we go to the rubber barons, what we realized was that they caused inflation. So it wasn't necessarily like stealing directly from the people, but assuming cash crops are produced, they buy them and store them. They buy them in bulk and store them, causing shortage in the society. And so when this happens, when there is shortage and there is no crops, people come to buy from them, but then they inflate the price more than the usual market price. So let's say if maybe a cup of rice is sold at 3 cedis, they sold theirs after causing the inflation. They sold theirs at 5 cedis or 6 cedis.
Thank you very much, and that's a very perfect addition. In fact, so one of the things that we also normally also happen, for example, and if you look at the slide, I also talked about the fact that they also had this monopolistic tendency. So there are certain essential services that they were the only ones who could provide them. And that is where this price inflation thing then comes in, because they were not living in a very competitive environment. They were living in an environment that allowed them to operate that illegitimate business because they were actually the only people. So for example, if you had the Volta River, you've seen it, and people are working on the pontoon, and then this pontoon appears not to be very reliable, right? There have been instances where it could go off and all those other things that characterize how the pontoon works. So one businessman decides to go, okay, listen, I'm going to build a bridge on it. He gets the license, government permits him, and then he builds a bridge. And as soon as it eases the tension and the fear that characterize the crossing the bridge from the Volta side to the northern side, even the pontoon operation may cease. Now, he may then decide that any car that uses his bridge will pay, let's say, 50 cedis. You don't have an option, so you pay. And as soon as you pay, just imagine if there are 100 cars that crosses every day. That is 50 cedis times 100. Do you get the argument? And that is the only service available. If you don't like it, then you may have to go through Kumasi. And that will take you 8 hours. And all that. So because they are operating these things, monopoly, then it becomes one of the means by which they influence prices and what have you. Okay. So we asked this question: is Ghana industrialized? And I'm sure for many of us, we know the answer.
No.
The answer is that we are not.
Say yes, we are
But
not.
there have been some
No, we are
industries. There are some industries, right? So recently, for example, the government published some new interventions. Companies that have been revitalized, companies that have been started from scratch, and was getting to almost 180 or so, right? And they said that there were also other companies that they have also licensed, and hopefully in the next year or two, they will come mainstream. But if you look at the size, and you see, until recently, almost all these industries, okay, were clustered in Accra and Kumasi, with the exception of some few ones that you could find in Kumasi or Boase, Bibiani, and these were heavy resource required companies. So for example, the mining companies will obviously have to be in the mining area, right? The timber companies have to be in these forest zones and all those other things that came across, right? And so these were some of the discussions that we all know. Yes, there are some questions, hands up. If there are some questions I would like to hear. Papa Ahinakwa, you change your name again. Hey, you this guy. Yes, ask your question, and then Graham, if your hand is
that's my name, Papa Chin. So with the industrialization not being fully industrialized, I don't get it. In Ghana, I don't get it. Because I know that during the era of Kwame Nkrumah, he built about 200 factories. And now we have one district, one factory, which all helps in the industrialization. So if they are saying the country or Ghana is not fully industrialized, then I don't understand or know any caveat to say that when you reach this certain stage, you have reached a form of industrialization, right, or if you are below,
that's a very
explain that one?
That's a very important question. That's a very important question. And thank you very much for asking that that question. All right, so this is what it is. This is the point that I wanted to make, and it's good you've made a point. So there is not necessarily a caveat that it is. I mean, what is the whole idea about industrialization? Is the extent to which, okay, the daily lives of the people, okay, is required or is managed by the use of technology and what have you. Majority of the things that we claim to be using on a daily basis are imported. Even the food we eat are imported. So how do you say that? And right, do you get it? So even, and one of the sectors where these new, for example, industries that are emerging are in the import substitutional industries, right? But go to any shop in Accra, and about 90% of what is being sold are imported, be it fruit juice, be it meat, be it even rice and all that. So it tells you that what the nation needs, the requirement of the state or the nation, is nowhere near what is being produced, right? And many of these industries that we are even talking about are now taking off. They haven't even grown their capacities and all that. Do you understand? So they are even within that enclave that they are operating, I'm not sure they can even meet that needs and what have you. And so, yes, I mean, if you consider, let's say, 2016, and now you could say that we have added more factories, but the impact is negligible. Yes, Nkrumah set up so many of the factories. About 90% of these factories collapsed. About 90% of them collapsed. And some of them collapsed even within the first 2 years. Right? And sometimes, and again, in this country, sometimes we don't do a bit more. If you have gone to see the books of some of these factories that Nkrumah set up, you realize that they never even broke even in their operations. But because it was government assisted, government was forced to keep it afloat. If they were allowed to operate at their own level, they probably would have just collapsed, right? And all those other things that happens. So that is why we still say that we still have some incipient industries. There's the potential for growth, but as we speak now, we are not. Kindly give me a minute and I'll be back to take your questions and then I'll continue. Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I'm back. If you can, let's continue. So I've talked about the fact that majority of these companies are agro-based industry and they are in the form of what we call import substitution industrialization, right? What we generally call ISI, import substitution industrialization. What do we mean? What we actually mean is that we are not creating new tastes, but we are just looking at the products that are currently available in the market, but these products are imported. And what are we seeking to do? What we are seeking to do is to make sure that we have companies that will produce Ghanaian made to replace these ones. So for example, if it is about fruit juice and we are buying a lot of imported fruit juice, then we will set up a config to produce pineapple juice for us. So we will stop buying the other imported ones. Do you understand? If it is about spaghetti and we are eating a lot of Indomie, we will set up a Ghanaian one. If it is about whatever, then we do that. Is that okay? So that's what we mean by the import substitution industrialization. And we even say that some of these companies are dependent on imported raw materials, right? But that is where the ISI is different. The 1D, 1F, okay? The 1D, 1F appears to be different. So the 1D, 1F policy it's not based on imported raw materials, but many of the companies that were set up initially require that we have to import these resources, primary resources, right, and what have you. So then, because we needed these things, then the harbors were also set up. And now there's a bit of technological services where we have the empty ATMs, the vending machines. And in fact, now one of the places where we are actually doing well is this whole issue about the digital economy, right? The digital economy. And I'm sure you all know what the digital economy is. One of our key features has been the MOMO and the interoperability bits. Now, what are we trying to do? We are also trying to build a very important, because the digital economy will thrive on solid ID systems, okay? And so I'm sure you've all heard that we are doing a re-registering of our SIM cards. Now we have residential address systems. We have our own version of the Google Map and what have you, which is supposed to move us to the next phase of the economy. Is that okay? All right, any question, please? I mean, I don't know what you mean by you were locked out during your explanation. Fortunately, my side, I haven't been locked out. So you will still get the opportunity to hear the audio and the video, right? So Papa, don't be overly worried. So what has been the impact of industrialization? I've talked about this. Next week when we meet, we'll be having this discussion on urbanization and rural migration. So I'm not intending to repeat that. But I'll except to touch on the issue about employment, which I have actually discussed based on the question that I think Jeffrey also asked, as to why he thinks that, why should I say that industrialization created enormous employment opportunities. But one of the key things that also industrialization does is also creates unemployment, right? It creates significant unemployment because essentially technology then takes the work of humans. And as we all know, the work that will be done by technology ordinarily would have been done by 10 or 20 human beings. And that's one of the threats. And so if you go to some areas, you'll be having to do that. So for example, in the modern era, nobody employs a typist. 20, 30 years ago, a typist was a very important skill that every company needed, right? So we had people who were messengers. What were messengers doing? Messengers were delivering letters. They were going to do photocopies and fax and all that. Now everybody, all you need to do is use your WhatsApp, use your social media platforms and what have you. And so, yes, there's a bit of unemployment. Another key thing that is also happening is that you get people who are overly qualified for the jobs that are available, because the jobs that are available has become so technology friendly that you do not necessarily need the more sophisticated skills, right? So people then tend to be underemployed. Underemployment simply means that you are working for a job that makes lesser use of your set of skills. Is that okay? All right. Now, we touched on the last element, which is the introduction of cash crops. And these are very topical, we all know. What are the cash crops? These cash crops were usually the production that were needed for to feed these industries, whether local or external. So for example, the cocoa manufacturing, the chocolate manufacturing companies are not in Ghana, but they created these need for us to produce these products in Ghana. And so many people are producing cocoa, and about 80% of the cocoa that is produced here are shipped out. Beyond that, we also have the cocoa processing company that also processes quite a number and what have you. What essentially this did was to create some wealth for those who took advantage, and some families are rich simply because they became cocoa farmers. What it also did was that it then suddenly began to create a strata, okay, or a level of inequality within the bigger society, because some people then began to command more resources than others, right? And that's what we mean by social stratification, where some were more richer, so probably on top of the hierarchy, and others were at the bottom of the hierarchy simply because they could not meet those other requirements. Is that okay? So those are some of the things that we can talk about. So let me quickly rush, if there are no questions, can I rush to the two key components? I think I probably underestimated the demand of this class. So let me see how I can manage these things quickly. So the first thing that we want to talk about is bureaucracy. Now, what is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy essentially deals with how human relations are managed in a very complex society. What did we say? So these industries have emerged, right? They are employing so many people. There are thousands, 500 people. You need to have a way of trying to make sure that these 1,000 people can work in a very congenial atmosphere to ensure that production is not sacrificed. And then again, the expectations and the demands of the company is also realized. So we say that bureaucratization is an administrative mechanism that was invented during the economic revolution to manage the large number of people employed in the established industries. According to Max Weber, it was a system of interdependent human beings designed for the achievement of the specific objectives of the company, right? So what are these? Specifically, let's look at the characteristics. Maybe that will help you. So one is the division of labor. So you're having 1,000 people, all the 1,000 people will not do the same thing. They will do some specific things based on the set of skills that they want, right? So the division of labor was based on functional specialization. Don't forget, in the early phase, there was division of labor, but this division of labor was principally based on age and then gender. So we tell you about things that men do and things that women do. But in this era, it was based on the set of skills that you have, right? Good. And two, bureaucracy is also characterized by the rights and duties of employees that are governed by rules. So when you come to the company, they tell you this and this is what you are expected to do. You are supposed to come to work for 8 hours. At the end of the 8 hours, you are entitled to so and so amount. Within that 8 hours, you are entitled to, let's say, 30 minutes of break for lunch and what have you. The work starts at 7:30 and you close at this and all that. Another key feature is that there's a hierarchy of authority, right? So you are accountable to this, and this person is accountable to this. And that's what in most society, when you go to every organization, we call what we call the organogram, right? And the organogram then tells you who is on top, followed by who, and who takes instruction from this person and what have you. Yes. The fourth feature is what we call the relationship that exists in that company is supposed to be based on what we call the impersonality of interpersonal relationship. You may be my wife, you may be my uncle, you may be my auntie, but remember that in this company, once you're working in that company, you're not working because you are my wife or you are my uncle, right? So the relationship between us is supposed to be guided purely by the rules of the game, right? That is why when you go to the hospital, they will always come and pick your folder, and depending on the time that you reported, you are supposed to. So one of the principles about the impersonality of interpersonal relationship is the whole idea about first come, first serve. Is that okay? Good. Now, the fifth feature is that there are procedures for dealing with work situation. So for example, give yourself as an example. If you are not satisfied with your grade, for example, there's a procedure as to how you're supposed to go about it. Do you understand? And then the sixth one is that promotions and selections is usually based on technical competence. It's about what you can do and not who you are. even though there's a general discussion today as whether really it is really about what you know, or is whom you know, or better still, who knows you, right? But in an ideal world, and Max Weber described his bureaucracy as an ideal type, that all things being equal, as the economists will say, ceteris paribus, that if all things work the way it ought to be, promotion, whether you be employed, and a few weeks ago, you saw the army recruitment, right? The huge numbers that joined the Airworks Stadium. And the discussion that ensued on social media was that even the army had already recruited their own, but these were just for the showmanship, right? You heard all those discussions. If things are supposed to work in a more dignified manner, promotion should be based on competence. So you write an aptitude test and you are employed simply because you did the best compared to the others, right? And the last one is that salaries is also based on ranks. In other words, you can't be lower on the rank and receive more salary than the other, right? So if you come to the university, the vice chancellor, who is the head of the university, should obviously take more salary than the laborer, than the lecturer, than the head of department, than what have you. So the rank would depict how much you get, right? Now, some of the funny side of this whole ideal situation as described by Max Weber is some of these very inefficiencies that has been observed. The first one is what we call reptipism. And reptipism developed, I think, in Ireland or so, where the files that are supposed to be pushed from one desk to the other wasn't pushed. And what became of it is that the people then began to take a red tape, they will fold it and tie it and dump it somewhere. Instead of them working on the file, they were not up. So they will dump it over and over and over and over, right? And so when you are frustrated and then you go in there, by the time you realize your file has been bundled in the tape, you know, in the current practice, what will happen is that it is filed. And in fact, we have been told that there have been instances where people's files are strategically taken and hidden, unless you come back and then do what they call the needful, right? Sometimes they will take your file and put it on a chair and sit on it, and you never find it. They are saying that in spite of all this bureaucracy, you still have some people who do not qualify in certain offices. So we talk about square pegs in round holes, or round peg in a square, whichever way you want to go about it. Then we also talk about the fact that in spite of this whole idea about promotion and the selection being based on technical competence, we still know this whole concept of who knows you, who knows you. In the past, the cliche was that whom you know, but we have been told that it is not really about whom you know, it's rather about who knows you. So you might know me, but I don't know you. And if I have to make a decision, then it's not about you knowing me, but it's about me rather who is supposed to make the decision knowing you. So if I know you, then there's a greater likelihood that I can favor you, right? So I mean, in a class of 123 currently, right, I'm sure being your instructor, everybody will know me, but it's as to whether your knowing me is enough. But if I know you, then it becomes more valuable. And people talk about all these other things. We also have this whole phenomenon of order from above, right? Where people then begin to push or pull what they call certain strings. And even though you may qualify, they will say, oh, no, you don't look nice. You are not from my tribe. You are not from whatever. And so you are denied the opportunity and what have you. Okay, so you have this whole idea where people begin to set aside the principles of first come, first serve. Remember, we have talked about one of the key features is this whole thing about impersonality of interpersonal relationship. I'm sure you've been to the hospital where some people have come late and yet they have been called and they have been attended to, whilst you who probably came first will be sitting idle. Yes, that is this whole idea that we talk about. And what are all these things at the end of the day will breed inefficiency and a decline in productivity. It creates bitterness in those who are ignored, and then eventually it breeds corruption. Yes, Kate, let me hear you.
I want you to speak on the fourth point.
Hello, Kate, unmute yourself and speak.
Please, I want you to speak on the fourth point.
What is the fourth point?
The external influence.
Oh, but I just did that. So, for example, so you are my student, right? I am supposed to grade you. We did your work. I realized that you had an A. But apparently you have insulted my head of department. And because my head of department wants to show you where power lies, he calls me and says, mark Kate down. She was so disrespectful. I'm under obligation because if I don't obey him, he might fire me. So I mark you down. There have been instances where people have been arrested for misbehaving in this country. And because they are party people, the president directs that they are released. They will probably not come and tell you that the president said we should release you. But so in some bizarre circumstances, the person is discharged. I mean, the classical example that we all talk about is I don't know whether you guys were matured enough, but I'm sure you should have been, because that was 2016, months to the election. This whole thing became popularly known as the Monty Tree. Right? There's a guy, I don't know where he is now, he's called Mugabe, and some two other party members had threatened to rape the Chief Justice then. And the Chief Justice had gone on contempt and has sentenced them, I think, to 3 months or so imprisonment. Then the party people petitioned the president, and the president used his influence to pardon them. Right? And it became a whole lot of issues. Right? Why did they release him? Because he had the power to do so. The Constitution allows him, but people felt that was a slight in the face of justice and discipline and what have you. I mean, even in the current regime, there have been some instances where people genuinely feel like certain people should be punished. In fact, I mean, I think earlier on, one of the things that people were saying was that the president was a clearing agent. Why? Because when people have been accused of perpetuating certain acts of corruption or whatever, the president will come out to say that I have investigated and they are not guilty. And people then begin to use the term clearing agent in reference to these acts. And that's what we mean by order from above and what have you. Yes. So if we can continue, we have barely 20 minutes. Yes, there are two questions, hands up. Papa Chum and Jeffrey, yes, quickly do that. And let me move to the next slide.
So mine is not actually a question. It was
you like it's not a real question, but just go ahead.
The Monty 3 was rather in the 2013 election petition when they said they were going to rape.
No. It wasn't the 2013 election. The petition, the people who were sentenced has nothing to do with the Monty 3. The Monty 3 were included Mugabe, Akugan, and I think there's a third person. These people were on radio because between 2015 and 2016, the MPP and I think this group, Let My Vote Count, had engaged in a series of litigation in the court. The first one was to say that they wanted compulsory to force the EC to do a new register, and that they were supposed to disqualify certain people who have registered with the National Health Insurance and all those. So there was a series of such, and in one case, before the case was to be held, these guys had said that the judges were biased and all that, and they seemed to be doing the bidding of the NPP and all that, and in fact threatened to rape them and beat them up and kill them and all those other funny things. The 2013, the people who actually went for prison, including this guy, Atuguba on the side of NDC, Ken Franchi, and all that. But that one, those guys were not actually pardoned. They actually served their term. Some of them 3 weeks, some 1 week and one. I think those who were pardoned were Samia Uku and the late Sir John, who were then fined to pay cash because some lawyers have intervened at the court and what have you. Right. So that one, I'm sure it was leading to the 2016 election.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Jeffrey, your hand was up. Have you dropped your? Speak up because I can't hear you. The line appears to be breaking. Jeffrey, your line is bad. I advise that you type in your question and come back again because we can hardly hear you. All right, so the next key thing that we talk about is professionalism. What is professionalism? So one of the cardinal features of the modern economy is this whole idea about professionalism. What is professional? Essentially, we are saying that professional bodies or association to protect its sanctity, right? So the training of professionals and what have you. So a person who has undergone, and I want a process of education, very important. One, considered long enough to equip him with the knowledge or competency, okay, to maintain high technical standard in his or her work is then referred to as a professional, right? So what it actually then meant was that in the quest to modernize, there was this whole general understanding that you need people who know what they are doing, people who have had certain level of exposure and training, right? So that they can understand what they are doing and advise and make sure that they are doing it with all the technical perfection that it requires. And anybody who has demonstrated this, then it qualifies as a professional. And the whole idea is that what he'll be doing then will be characterized by professionalism, because he's doing it because not only does he think it is right, but he knows it is right. And if you ask him to explain why he's doing it the way he's doing it, he will be in a position to explain and explain perfectly to you, right? And in most cases, you see these professionals forming an association that regulates their activities, and they tend to be very protective of the sanctity of that union. And so let anybody commit certain crime. And so one of the things, for example, until recently, everybody who was in the classroom could call himself as a teacher. And so somebody who has never been trained is not affiliated to any association, but because he has a chalk, he called himself a teacher. And the teachers were not comfortable because they would say that there was no means of identifying. So one of the things they sought to do in the new Education Act was to professionalize education. So everybody is given a license. And if you don't have a license, you are not considered as a teacher, right? So they want to protect their territory to make sure that somebody, their integrity is not drawn. So you have many of such associations. So you can talk about the Ghana Medical Association. You can talk about the GBA, Ghana Bar Association, that is Association of Lawyers in good standing. Now you can talk about UTAG, University Teachers Association of Ghana. You can talk about, and all these are people who have been trained for a very long period. They seem to understand what is required of them. And you see them doing that work as well. The gentleman who has his mic on, please.
Sir, please, we can't hear you.
He's no more.
Oh, but
I think
he's here.
I think he's not around. So wait for him to come.
But he's recording too.
So let's keep quiet and wait for him.
You should keep quiet. Our data is going though.
Your data is going on quick.
It's the class we are having.
Papa, P. Oh, the boy has run away from the class.
Hello, good evening, class.
Good evening, madam.
Good
evening.
Good evening, madam.
Dr. Ohiming here. Yes, so I think Dr. Obin's line has dropped. So I'm going to continue from where he took off. Okay, so where have you reached? Hello?
Professionalism.
Professionalism, madam.
Professionalism.
Professionalism.
Okay, so let me try and get my slides.
Thank you.
Right, so he was talking about professionalism being another feature of the new economic system, which is different from the traditional economy. So you have people who go through a period of training where they acquire skills, and you use those skills that have been acquired in your work. So for somebody to be considered a professional, first of all, that person must go through training like you are doing. So first of all, you have to have an education, go through training long enough to be considered a professional. So for instance, each professional has its own requirements. So let's say that for a primary school teacher, you have to go to school for 3 years. So if you go to school and you don't complete, you do only the first year and you don't complete your period of training, you cannot be considered a full professional. So first of all, you have to acquire some skills through training, okay? And it is those skills that you have acquired that gives you the license to practice as a professional in whichever field you have chosen. So if you're a doctor, there are requirements for you. If you're a nurse, there are requirements for you. If you are a lawyer, there are requirements for you. And after you have gone through that training, people have the assurance that you have the requisite skills to practice whichever trade you have been trained for. So that is the first one, professional training, where people acquire skills. So that is one. Two is that professionals belong to bodies or associations, what we call the professional bodies. And these bodies regulate the various professionals. So when you take teachers, the Ghana National Association of Teachers, that is NAT, they regulate the teaching profession, okay? Even though they do not provide certificates like the nurses do, they have a body that regulates them. The Ghana Medical Association is a body that regulates medicine. So it regulates doctors and dentists, and they make sure that anybody who calls themselves or him or himself as a doctor or a dentist has the requisite training to be able to do that. Okay, so all the professions have their own regulatory bodies. Just recently, the MPP government is introducing licensure exams for teachers, so that if you're a teacher, you have to write an exams and you would be qualified as a professional teacher. That is besides going to the training college and qualifying as a teacher. So it is this regulatory body that gives them their professional authority. Okay, so within that profession, you have the authority to practice. So sometimes we hear that somebody, a quack doctor, has been arrested for passing as a medical doctor. Just last week, somebody was arrested somewhere at Bowie. I think his name is called something in Kunim, who claims to be a physiotherapist. And he has been offering some medical services to women. And apparently he has been abusing the women, having sex with them, molesting them sexually. And he has been arrested through the work of Manasseh Azuri. So you need the professional authority. And there is a body that also regulates it. Okay. Then the third one is that there are sanctions or protection that the society provides professionals. And so society uses its own money, that is the taxpayers' money, to train these professionals, even though they pay some form of fees, okay? It is not totally free, but the society subsidizes it a lot. And so you get the protection from society. And that protection shows itself, as I have explained, when people are arrested for not having the required sanctions. And then secondly, society protects professionals through the training that it provides them. So we have training institutions like the training colleges, the nursing training colleges. We have the various medical schools, the Ghana School of Law. We have the university, okay? And once you are holding a certificate from a recognized society, it means that that certificate is being given to you by the society, okay, through the regulating bodies to be able to practice. So in a lot of practices, or when you go to a lot of organizations, we want to see your operating license. If you're a lawyer, we want to see your certificate from the Ghana Bar Association, whatever degrees that you have, we want to see it. We want to see your business registration permit from the Registrar General's office to practice. We want to see your business certificate from the local assembly. So the AMA or whichever jurisdiction you are in would provide you with that certificate. So that is how the society protects the various profits. The second point is that society gives professionals incentives. You provide them incentives to be able to work. So if you take footballers, for instance, before then, people would just play football for fun. But if you are a professional footballer, they are paid so much. Sometimes they are paid like 500,000 or $1 million, okay, just to play. Maybe a week, a month, or a year. People sign contracts for a year, and the amount of money they are paid is so huge. Other professional bodies are also paid, and that is one way that the society provides sanctions. In other words, protect them. So remember from our discussion last semester that when you talk about sanctions, they can be positive and negative. So the term sanction here, we are not referring to it in its negative form, but in its positive form, where rewards and protection is given to professionals. And then the third is that professionals are protected by law enforcers. So they may be protected by the police, and then the professional bodies that I spoke about earlier on, they also do protect these professionals and also regulates the work that they do. So that is the third qualification of a professional. So please, if you have questions, you can ask as I go along. Right. Any question, please?
Madam, please. I think you've not explained the fifth point.
Pardon?
I'm saying you have not explained the fifth point. That is the subculture.
The subculture.
Yes, please.
Yes, I will come to that. So
Okay.
I haven't done the fourth and the fifth.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, madam.
Hello, Kate. Is that Kate? Yes, go ahead, please. Hello? Any question, please?
Madam, please, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Madam, please, I want to ask if footballers who have retired are still considered to be professionals.
Okay, so that is a great question. You also are a nurse and you have retired. Are you still considered a professional?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, once you're in the profession, you are always a professional.
Still a professional. And you know, most professions have regulations requiring regarding the exits of older. If you're a teacher, the training that you have acquired is still there. Nobody takes it away from you. In retirement, what it means from the work that you don't cease to become a professional. So you have some footballers who have retired and have gone on to do something else, like becoming coaches and opening academy and other stuff. Okay, Enoch.
Thank you.
Madam, please, adding up to what you just said, I think they are so professionals. That's the reason why people like engineers and some teachers are given contracts when they retire. They work on contract for retirement.
Yes, and some act as consultants. Okay, so maybe if you were being paid upon retirement, you want to start your own business and pay yourself, and you work till you drop. But the fact that you are retired does not mean that you have ceased to be a professional. Okay, Papa Chu.
Thank you. I know that in Ghana here, at the age of 60, you are supposed to retire. But in some public offices, or when you hold some public offices, like for instance, the IGP that left, but his retirement was extended to come in and help. And so like the question she asked, that if you are retired, doesn't mean you are done. It is to just add up to what you are saying.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in the US, for instance, for most professions, most universities, almost all the US universities don't have a retirement age. You work till you decide that you are too tired, and so you want to leave. You may come back on contract. As I explained, you may even decide to set up your own practice. So if you're a footballer, as what? A professional footballer, so celebrated as the greatest footballer that's ever lived on planet Earth, even though he does not play again. Okay, so 2 other hands. Let me see. So, Papa Chum, do you have another question? If not, please put your hand down.
No, I have.
Okay. Jeffrey.
I was wondering, listen, yeah, I was wondering for professionalism.
Yeah.
Could it still be considered professional in formal education before you could be considered as a professional?
Okay, so to begin with, you don't need formal education, but you must go through some form of training. Okay, so for instance, I'll come to Apostle Joseph. For instance, the footballers, most of them are not educated. You don't go to school, quote unquote, like formal school, even though we have football academies to go and learn football, but we still consider them professionals because they have gone through some form of training. Okay, it is not only education, but they have other forms of qualifications that we talked about. So there are sanctions of the society. So for instance, if Real Madrid is playing and then one of the spectators jump onto the field, what happens? When normally a spectator jumps onto the field, when a match is going on.
Madam, they chase him.
Off the pitch.
Yeah, they chase them off the pitch.
Yeah,
and if you are not lucky, the police will even send you to the police station and lock you up for the night. Okay, they have not gone through formal education like a school to learn, but they have sanctions. That is, the society is what? Protecting them. And then they have the professional authority to back them. So they belong to UEFA. What is the UK Football Association called? Or Ghana Football Association, GFA.
CAF.
And CAF and all people. Okay, so they are recognized as professionals. So if you go through certain training authority, the sanction subculture, then you would be qualified as a professional. Kojo Safo, what do you think? Is he a professional? So he has not gone to school. That is one. As far as I know, he is not a trained engineer. So that is one. Does he have a professional authority? Does he enjoys the sanctions of the society? Okay. You want to help answer this question? James, your hand is up.
Madam, please, no, I wanted to ask something similar.
Okay. Okay. Great. Pachum, you asked the question.
No, I
If you
wanted
asked
to.
the question, you
I
wanted
wanted
to
to.
contribute.
I wanted to
Okay.
say perhaps the first thing he's doing is entrepreneurship, or he being an entrepreneur or something.
Yes.
He do whatever he's doing.
So, madam, please, that's what I wanted to ask. Who can entrepreneurs be considered as professionals? Like these business people who didn't go through any.
Yes and no. So let me start from some who acquire knowledge, they study, they have a license to operate in their various professions. And then we have those who are called entrepreneurs. Okay, so they entrepreneurs, they don't have, they have not been to school, but they may even employ professionals to work for them. Do you understand? So they would be in between professionals and what do you call it? And entrepreneurs. Okay. So these people will be considered entrepreneurs and not professionals in the strictest sense of the word. But if, let's say, they belong to a professional authority, okay? So I heard Dr. Bain talking about that is the funds. He is an entrepreneur. I don't know his qualification, but let's say that he does not hold any university degree, but has set up this poultry farm. Okay. He may belong to the Association of Poultry Farmers. Okay, you know they have an association. So he would belong to them, okay? And if he belongs to them, then they would have a code of ethics. The code of ethics, I've not spoken about that, but these are rules and regulations that governs the operations of the various profession, okay? So for instance, the medical profession, they have rules and regulations known as the Code of Ethics. And one of the basic code of ethics in medicine is that you don't disclose people's illnesses or condition to anybody, okay? So if a woman has HIV/AIDS and she doesn't wish that her husband or her children would know about her condition, you cannot disclose it. The nurse or the doctor who is treating that AIDS patient cannot disclose their HIV/AIDS status. I once interviewed a woman who has 6 children. only 2 of the children know that their mother has HIV/AIDS. The other children don't know. So they visit her at the hospital, they pay for her medical bills, but they don't know exactly what is wrong with her because she doesn't wish that all the children know what is wrong with her. That is the code of ethics. So let's say the Ghana National Poultry Farmers Association, I don't know their exact name, I'm just making something up. If they have code of ethics governing their members, that if you are going to buy a feed for your poultry farmers, you have to buy 10 bags. Or if you are entering into a contract with government, you should let the association members know, okay? And then if they have a subculture means a culture that prevails within that profession alone. So for footballers, you see them wearing their boots and their jerseys. Okay, that is their subculture. You see them in certain hairstyles. Now everybody is copying that. You see all their tattoos. And some of these cultures are very silent. There are things that you don't see elsewhere outside the football fraternity, but you find it only within the football fraternity. There are some practices you only find amongst nurses. You don't find anywhere else. So that is the subculture that we talking about. So sometimes some professions or some businesses would not qualify wholly as a professional, okay? But what I want you to think about profession, think about it this way, that it is something that people have given themselves to do, to earn a living, of which they devote most of their entire lives or their adult lives in doing, okay? Which is different from the traditional economy where you have farmers. Even these days, we qualify all of them as professions. So when you look at the census data and they're talking about occupation and profession, you see farmers, horticulturalists, and all those people being listed as profession. And we're using it loosely in that sense of people who have devoted themselves to doing something. So when you say, what is this woman's profession? She's a hairdresser. She's a dressmaker, because they've gone through some training. But when you come to the strictest sense of the word, as W.T. Wood conceptualized, then you may exclude some groups of people within that conceptualization. Is that okay? Okay, so let me go to the chat. So somebody is asking whether we have so we don't have TAs now, so there will be no tutorials. And then somebody was asking about bureaucracy, whether the impact is all negative. No, it is not all negative. As Max Weber designed it, it is designed for efficiency, okay, and to run big organization. If you are employing only 1 or 2 people, then you don't need a bureaucracy. But if you have 10, and as your business is expanding, then you need bureaucracy to be able to organize your business. So somebody is asking whether the recording will be available. Yes, it will be available, but as we explained, then the size may be too big to be put on Sakai. So it will be made available to the various class reps. I understand you have Telegram that you can put on. So please contact your class reps for the recordings. Okay, so our time is up. So I'm going to end here. If you have any further questions for us, send us an email, or you can put it on forums, or just note it down. The next time we meet, you can ask your question. So 2 hands up, Papa Chum and James, and then we are done. Hello?
Madam,
yes.
Please, me, I just want to ask if there will be any strike, like Utah go and back or any strike this week.
We will know by Friday. There will be a meeting. We've been told that Utah National.
Hey, Papa,
oh, really?
Yes. They just
okay.
I said, Madam,
officially, a decision will be made on Friday, so don't worry.
Friday, no mama decision.
Speak English.
Friday, no mama decision.
Okay, so somebody is saying, are there any recommended books? We've talked about that in our first lecture. So please, go and look for Abochi or Nukunya.
Abochi or Nukunya. Short walk.
Yes. Wow, you're really. Okay, so thank you all for coming. We'll make the recordings for tomorrow's lecture and that of Thursday all available to you. Okay, so please contact your class reps for the recordings. Okay, thank you.